Hey everybody, welcome to VueDC. Anybody new today? Yes, so many people. Heck yeah. Just a few announcements before we get started. We're going to be doing lightning talks today, hopefully. We've never done this before, but we're looking forward to doing more in the future. So in terms of Vue.js stuff coming up, there is a Vue.js live stream with Evan Yu and Chris Fritz on May 29th. It's going to be really interesting. They're going to be announcing some new stuff that either we know about or we don't know about. It's on Crowdcast. On June 6th, there's a Vue Contributor Days. Basically, they're going to have a forum of lots of core developers and people you've probably seen presenting before about Vue, and you'll have a chance to talk to these people and hear more about new stuff. Evan Yu will also be there as well. DevFest DC is coming up on June 8th. Our very own Ben Hong is not here today, but he will be speaking at that event. He's going to be talking about VuePress. And obviously, if you guys are interested in speaking, if anyone's interested in speaking ever, please email us. We're always looking to hear about what you're doing. There's a show and tell that we're going to do today where we've chosen two different talks. Those are meant to be small 5 to 10 minute presentations about just whatever random project you're doing that's in Vue or uses Vue, your experiences with it. And if you have anything at all and you want to do that in the future, we really want to do these at every meetup just to see what people are doing because it's so new and cool. So our sponsor today is Bloomberg. NA. That's not right. It's BNA. I did these late last night. This is Tracy Hilinka.
So thanks. Welcome. Glad everybody can make it. I just want to say a few quick words. So you all know Bloomberg. We're Bloomberg Law. So we actually focus on the legal sphere, news, the research data, that type of thing. What's really interesting is yesterday, Evan, you actually spoke at the Bloomberg New York office because we have 3 different offices that have, like, over the last year or 2 years started using Vue. And I guess they had enough interest that they actually paid for him to come out and speak to the New York office, and they broadcasted for us. So that was actually really cool to have that. So it's really picking up inside of Bloomberg. And that's all I want to say.
Any upcoming jobs or anything like that?
Yeah, we actually are looking to hire developers. If anybody's interested, you can come see me afterwards, and I'll get your resume. So. Yep. We're always hiring. We're always looking for good developers.
Thank you for the pizza.
Like everybody else, right?
Thank you for the pizza, Tracy.
You're welcome.
Always appreciate it. I like We the Pizza. So we're going to start with Chris Rivera. He's going to talk about Introduction to TypeScript. Chris, thanks for being here.
Yeah, it's all good. No worries, I got.
Sorry.
No worries. All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Chris Rivera. I am a senior software developer at a local company in Roslyn called MBO Partners. We basically make tools that make it easier for independent contractors and enterprise clients to do business with each other. And a lot of overhead reduction of paperwork and taxes and everything that makes it easier so that independent contractors can just simply get to work and the enterprise clients can hire them for the work. I also am a 50% managing member of my own company, DK Wares, and we make video games. We make mobile games, and one of the most recent games is Taxi Town. It's on the Android and iOS market, so feel free to take a look at that. And you can follow me at KK Rivera on Twitter. And this is my talk on Intro to TypeScript. So first off, let's start with defining the correct terms here. So a lot of people commonly use the word JavaScript, but it's actually, the standard is called ECMAScript. ECMAScript was first introduced in 1997 as a way to standardize the previous implementations of JavaScript that had no standard to them. And so editions 1 through 5 were published over the subsequent years, but at a slightly irregular interval. So the one version that most developers who are called JavaScript developers are using ES5. If you look at this, swath of code, you probably recognize it. Lots of vars. This is some node code with requires and some callback function and whatnot. So this is what some, just ES5 code looks like. It should look pretty familiar. So ES5, again, what I say was that It's what most developers write with who are JavaScript developers. You should know strict mode, immutable globals, array extensions. There's a lot of features from ES3 to ES5. ES4 was actually skipped or abandoned in favor for ES5. And the big advantage with why most JavaScript developers write in ES5 is because it's already supported by every modern browser. I don't know if you want to call IE11 modern anymore, but it's still IE11, Edge, Firefox, Chrome, Safari, Opera, and also server runtimes. There's a couple other ones I never really heard of when I was looking this up, but definitely Node 4 is a much older version, but it fully supports ES5 along with Chrome mobile browsers for Android and iOS. So moving forward, 6 years later, ES6 was introduced, or also known as ES 2015, and it was published in, you guessed it, 2015. Pretty standard naming convention there, but this was the first of many additions to come as a promise to annual upgrades for the standard. So they're definitely every year they wanted to put out new upgrades, new features to the standard. And here we had huge gains with let and const variables, classes and modules, arrow functions. I'm sure everyone has heard of or seen or probably used promises for doing asynchronous actions. Lots and lots of really good features. And the browser support is still very good. It was out in 2015, so current day. Everything basically that was in ES5, that was supporting ES5, is supporting ES6 as well, except for IE11. You know, that's the desktop, but I don't think anyone is really too sad about that one. And Node 4 as well doesn't fully support it. It supports it sort of, but that's why you have to go to like Node 8 or Node 9 or so on. And similarly, it's mostly supported on Chrome for Android and Safari for iOS. But who doesn't want new features? Again, the promise for new features on an annual basis continued on. So we have ES 2016, ES 2017, soon ES 2018, if not already. But if you notice, per an annual cadence, the feature set is much smaller. So for ES7, aka ES 2016, you have the exponentiation operator, which indicates that or means that you don't have to use the math.pow anymore. They have a numerical operator for that. It's the double exclamation marks, as well as the array prototype includes. It's a very useful feature. And then ES8, a very important, but again, a single type of feature, was the async await, which lets you handle promises very easily in a very programmatic and very linear way when you look at the code. But again, as I noted, it's a smaller feature set as in comparison from ES5 to ES6 because it's just a year gap for them. But here's the problem though. Which browsers support it? Only the bleeding edge browsers support the latest standards of ECMAScript. So we look at this and say, well, what do we do? How do we use these new features? Do we just exclude browsers from our feature set? Do we alienate our users or force them to use new browsers? It's not a great experience, there's something not right here about this. So enter transpilers. So transpilation is the process of taking one language and compiling it into another. So transpilers will take ES6 or higher code and transpile it down to ES5. So you still get the feature set that you want or trying to use, or the newest features, and you still get the browser support. So some of these most popular transpilers are Babel or Grunt or I don't know how to pronounce that. It's either Babel or Babel. I'm not sure. But then we have, Grunt and Gulp are two build systems, but they also support transpilation as one of their build steps as well. But it seems a little, you have to upgrade the standard and use the new browser and so on, and then you have to transpile it. So, I mean, there's an evolution to the ECMAScript standard. You see, ES1 was very old, ES6 is great, and so on, better standards. But again, this is all a very arduous process, it feels like. So, I mean, there has to be a better way. And I think you guys all know what that might be. It's TypeScript! TypeScript, everyone! So, TypeScript was first released in 2012 by none other than Microsoft. Now, I know a lot of people, there's a lot of stigma around Microsoft software for a long while, especially Windows. I see a lot of Mac devices here, not too many PCs out there. But TypeScript is fantastic. It was an open source project, so you can just go download it, fetch it, try it out, compile it, run it, and you can also contribute to it. And just so that you know, it's not just TypeScript isn't some like one-off, like a few people in their basement are using it language. Google's Angular adopted it in version 2 and continue to support it, and if not, embrace it and promote it in later versions up through 6, which is their current. And Vue.js version 2.5 and up support TypeScript as well. I don't want to give away what's coming later, but you'll see that. And so basically, TypeScript is actually a superset of the latest version of ECMAScript. The later version of TypeScript that you have supports and has all the features of the latest version of ECMAScript. But you say, oh no, what about browser support? Well, actually, no browser supports TypeScript. But this is on purpose because the TypeScript language comes with a TypeScript compiler, which will allow you to compile it down to whatever version of ECMAScript you want. If you want full compatibility, compile down to ES5. If you want some of the later features of ES6 in the browser, you can compile it to ES6. If you want to compile it to ES8 or whatever, then by all means you can. But this is fantastic because we still get the feature set that is all of ECMAScript, plus we get all of the features of TypeScript on top of it. So we have compatibility, we have a powerful language, and we have all the features that come with ECMAScript, so that everyone knows and loves. So here's some of the features. You have basic types and assertions, interfaces, classes, and inheritance. So people who are Java developers or have been Java developers or C++ or C# developers will be in very good company here. You'll feel very comfortable here because this is a lot of things that they took from object-oriented programming languages and put it into a very script-like language still. So functions, namespaces, modules, generics, and even decorators. So there's a lot more. I don't have enough time to go into all of those. So today, as an intro to TypeScript, I'm going to go over basic types and assertions and interfaces for you guys today. So let's start with basic types and assertions. Again, you will be Java developers and so on will be very familiar with what I'm going to go over here. But so here are the types that TypeScript provides and supports for your use. Boolean, numbers, string, array, tuples, and nulls, any's, enums, void, never, and object. So there's some things here that are not in the Java language that were added for TypeScript purposes because they make more sense in a scripting language sense versus some things that you will easily recognize, such as Boolean, number, string, and array, and so on. So let's go through a few examples of these. So this is how a Boolean is defined and asserted. The colon, and then after the variable name says, I'm asserting that this variable is of this type. And that ensures that anything on the right side of the equal sign has to abide by that type assertion. Moving on, we also have here numbers, or you can have them in decimal, hex, binary, octal, but again, the assertion is the important thing to indicate and restrain what's on the right side of the equal sign. So again, it's the colon and the number, or the colon and the Boolean. So I'm going to go through these. String is very straightforward. Colon string, you can only have a string on the right side. Colon, so now we're going to go through arrays. Arrays can be defined in two ways. You can do what the array is and then do the braces afterward, or you can use the array object keyword and do a templating angle braces and put the number inside. So those are both two ways, but again, that asserts that you can only have an array of numbers. Tuples are something that I think a lot of object-oriented developers have struggled with, made classes for, and something that was made very easy in TypeScript. Simply, you define the colon, you say that I want a square brace of something that's a string and a number, And then when you initialize it, you have to initialize it with, I think you all guessed it, string and number. You get a, it's okay to assign the hello and 10 versus 10 and hello. That's an error. You will get a compilation error, which is something that JavaScript developers have been wanting for a long time. So that's something I'm giving away a little bit why TypeScript is so awesome. And then finally, undefined or null characters or null types is very simple. Colon undefined, that's something from JavaScript. Everyone knows what an undefined thing is versus something that is null. Null is an object, but in here, null has a specific type as well. So you can assert that this variable will only be null. And of course, you're seeing all these lets. You can do const as well. TypeScript does not allow you to do var. Var is something from ES5, and var is not allowed anymore. You have to define it as a let or a const by the ES6 standard. Any and enums and voids are pretty easy. Speaking about vars, an any assertion is basically saying this variable is a var because it's a var args. You can say I am a number or I'm a string or whatever. You can just assign it and assign it and assign it as whatever you want. It doesn't matter. But it's a very slippery slope to doing that. I would highly advise you never to do that unless you really have to tell the compiler, just let this be an any just in this case, because then you're negating the whole purpose of TypeScript. You're not really giving it a hard type that you know and expect and want compilation errors to come up for if you just say any everywhere. So it's very important that you use this very sparingly. An enum, again, another object-oriented construct, is just an enumerated list of items but with a string name associated with it. So you just define it with the enum variable or the enum name right before the variable assignment, and then you can assign that, or you can assert that C, the variable, is going to be an enumerated number or of a color, so you can just use color.green to pass that around. You can also, you're not stuck with 0, 1, and 2. You can define what these numbers are in your enumeration. Very easy, very simple. And then finally, void. Void is something that a lot of JavaScript developers are used to when you just have a function that just performs an action and doesn't return anything. Well, you can assert that this function cannot return something. If you try to return something, then it's going to give you a compilation error right in line and tell you you shouldn't be returning something because this function is expecting a void type, which means you don't return. So it's pretty awesome how you can assert the types on these variables and functions. And then finally we have never and object. So never means that you don't even get to the end of the function. So void means I get to the end of the function, but I don't return anything. Never is something where it's just intended to basically, I think this is one of the only cases is where you're just going to throw, or you know you're going to error and it's not going to get anywhere. So that's when you use the never assertion. Again, you have that at the end of the function definition, and you declare and assert that I'm never going to return anything, or I'm never going to get to the end of this function. And finally, object. Object is the thing that most people who have done JavaScript are most familiar with. It's just JSON notation. So here we can assert that we have a function create with a variable parameter O, and it can be an object or null. So that's something else that you can do in TypeScript, that you can do union operators, which say it can be an object or a null. So let this thing be one or the other. So when you go to create prop and you pass in an object, which is JSON notation, that's okay. You can do that. Or if you pass a null, because that's what the assertion told the parameter to allow, you can pass in null. But if you pass in a number like 42 or a string or a Boolean, anything else other than those two things, you will get a compilation error and your code will not compile. All right, so now types are done. Let's go to interfaces, where this is a very powerful thing that was introduced in TypeScript, and this basically lets you define custom types so that you can restrict parameters or outputs to be as such. So the first thing here is, let's take a look at this example. So this is a function called printLabel, and it has a label object as its first parameter, and we're saying I want this label object to be an object that at least has a label property that has a value of string. Okay, so we have to have the label key, and it has to have a value of string. So if we jump to where it says let my object, we have an object that says size of 10, but we also have the key label, and it has a size of 10 objects, so that's a string. So when we say print my label or print label with my object, this is good. But how do we make sure that, how do we use an interface to make this a bit more eloquent, a bit more reusable, and a bit more well-defined in a certain part of your application? We can use the interface keyword. So at the top we have the interface labeled value, and we say with the curly braces out, it's how we indicate what an interface is. We say we have a label and it's a string. So it's the same thing that we just had back here. Again, label string as the parameter, but now we're just taking that and storing it as an interface. But then when we go to the function print label, we don't have to redefine that this thing is an object that has a label and a string. We just use the interface there as our type assertion. And then the rest of the code behaves exactly the same as the other example. Okay? We have optional properties that we have on. So I just showed you a required property. Now optional properties are notated with the question mark colon. So that means that this is an interface that will be for an object that can either have a color or a width or both or none. So each parameter is optional, so they can be defined or not in it. But if you do define something that has that optional parameter, it has to say color or it has to say width. So it can be one or the other, but nothing else. So again, here we have the function create square, and the config is using that interface as its assertion. And we say if we jump all the way down to the bottom, the inside of the function is not so important. We have as my square, we call create square with it, and we pass in, notice, an object with just one of those parameters defined. We could pass in one with no parameters, an empty JSON, but we couldn't pass in one that was like color 1 or width 1. That would give you an error because that doesn't abide by the interface. And finally, we have read-only properties. So that means that we define them as just with the read-only keyword inside of the interface. And what that means is that we define it once, but we can't assign it another value afterwards. So we have our let point, and we have our interface point, and P1 is asserted as a point. We define it to match the interface, and then if we try to assign X afterward on P1, then it just will not work. It will error at you, and that's because that's how we define the interface, because we only wanted it to be a read-only parameter. So now we have types inside of interfaces. So the first type is a function type. So the way we define a function type inside of an interface is simply with the open and close parentheses. It looks just like the function signature that you would have if you just chopped off the function keyword. But you have basically first parameter and second parameters are strings, and then the last parameter, the return of this function needs to be a Boolean. So the way we use that is, let's say we have a let variable called my search, and we assert that it's a search function interface, and when we define it or set the equals to it, we have to abide by that interface. So the source is a string, the substring is a string, but notice the return is returning a Boolean. We're saying if result is greater than -1. So that's what the interface is asserting inside of its function type. We have indexable types, and so basically what that allows you to make is how you want to constrain what a JSON object looks like. So where this is saying is that we have an index that is a number. So what object has an index that's a number? An array, right? So that's why this is an interface string array. And then the value, this afterward, is the string. So we're asserting that the index is a number and that the value is a string. All right? And so we use that interface, we assert my array is a string array, and then when we assign my array to Bob and Fred, which are both string values, and the index is definitely a number, this is valid, this is good. And we can also fetch variables out of it and whatnot. Now, let's look at read-only indexable types. These are exactly the same thing as the previous example, but you just can't assign to it after the fact. So we have that read-only string array, we have that my array that's typed as read-only string array assigned to Alice and Bob, and then on the next line we try to assign index 2 to Mallory, and you're going to get an error. You don't get an error because of index out of bounds, you only get an error because the type doesn't work. At runtime you'd get the error, but at compile time it would show you can't assign anything else to this array. And finally, one of the biggest and best and most powerful parts of TypeScript is using interfaces with class objects. Again, people who have had object-oriented programming or classes or worked in it will be very familiar here, but basically I have a clock interface. The interface says that I can have a variable called current time that is a date object, and we have a function called setTime that receives a variable d that is also a date. And so we define the class below called a clock. We use the keyword implements to use the interface to constrain how the inside of the class looks and how you know it will behave on the outside. So it has to implement current time, that's a date, and it has to also implement setTime, the function. Notice it's not just the signature, it's also the actual execution and implementation of the inside of the function is this.currentTime is equal to d. And then it has a constructor as well as all the ES6 classes have. Last but not least, extending interfaces. You may want to reuse base interfaces and branch off of them. So we have the interface shape, and it just has a variable called color, that's a string. And we also have the interface square. Now you use extends keyword to extend an interface to basically gain the properties of the interface that you're trying to extend from. And it is, we just add a side length to it, and then here, if you look at where let square equals that angled brace, that's another way that we can assert the type of an object as well. It doesn't have to be colon square, it could be angled braces square and the object as well, because everything can have a type in that manner. And then we are able to have access to a square's color and a square side length. And finally, how do we gain all these superpowers also, or most easily use them? I'm sure a lot of JavaScript developers here already have heard of or are already using Microsoft Visual Studio Code. I know, another Microsoft product. What's going on here? The world is falling apart. It is honestly with the fastest speed, and it's becoming the best editor for both JavaScript and TypeScript editing. You get fast compilation errors that just show up in line. I know Angular is a bad word to use in these meetups, but it's definitely the preferred TypeScript editor for Angular developers as well. But VS Code is extremely customizable and extensible, and is used and has a lot of plugins for Vue.js as well. And these are just a few of them that I just listed as some of the most popular, but there's a huge list of Vue.js extensions or plugins that VS Code supports, and you can get that at code.visualstudio.com. And that's what we use at my job and at home as well. And it's our preferred. So that's it. Thank you so much. Please follow me at KK Rivera if you like this, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Kris.
All right.
That was great, man.
Thank you.
You did a great job. So, man, I wish we had like a lightning bolt sound or something. It's so cool, especially with the rain. So my name's Christian Guirreri. I'm sure I've met a lot of you. I'm a senior front-end developer at Politico. And so TypeScript is definitely new to us. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I'm an expert. Kris is absolutely much further along than I am. So when I ask why TypeScript, I refer to Kris. Is this like, is it karate or
Yeah.
are you black belt?
Yeah.
You're nuts. That's awesome. I had to grab that when I saw it. So I thought a great way to teach myself TypeScript was to take an old Vue app that we went over back in January. So we built this from scratch. I'm redoing this presentation. That's why it's not online at the moment. But it basically, it used Vue 2.5, Webpack 3, Vue Loader 13 at the time, and it's Pose Ninja. You can see how it behaves. So it has enough complexity where we at least have some sort of data coming through, and we can use TypeScript in its fullest way. So Viter is definitely highly recommended among the community. Pretty much any tutorial, they're going to tell you to install this first. It comes with a bunch of really cool features, but the biggest one in terms of TypeScript is TypeScript. It's definitely the best out there for VS Code. It is VS Code only. I know there's some other stuff out there for Sublime, but I'm already into the VS Code world, so I really don't know. But we can find out for you if you get on our Discord chat, and we can chat about it. So the first step for me was to take this project, was just install TypeScript, right? So this is going to grab the latest versions of both TypeScript and TS Loader. And I'm basically just following through what's in the Vue docs. So the next step was make sure you have a tsconfig.json file. This is for the compiler. And this is the default settings that they have on the Vue docs. So I used it, and it worked fine. I never had to touch it later on. I know there's a lot more stuff that you can do here, and that might be for a later talk, Kris. But this worked for me, and I didn't have any problems with it, so I left it alone. So my first code touch was Webpack. And this is just adding the .ts file type to get everything up and running. This should be pretty familiar if you've ever used Webpack. Further down in the file, we have to resolve TS files. And then this one was a little weird to me. It took me some time to understand this. I was chatting with Kris about it today. But shim is required. And you'll even see this in Vue CLI 3. And this is basically, as far as I've been able to understand it, it's bringing the Vue code in so that TypeScript can compile it and understand what a Vue file is and what a Vue object is. Is that pretty accurate? Okay. So my first step was to rename any JavaScript files to .ts, and that immediately gives you TypeScript compilation in VS Code. And then obviously, since I've renamed main.ts, I have to change my entry point on my Webpack config. And so right off the bat, immediately after saving that, you get this lovely problems panel in VS Code. You probably have all seen this if you've done any linting. And my goal was just to walk through these and understand them and see how far I could get and get rid of them all, basically. So the first one is actually pretty easy. And it might be the Webpack config that I had used for this project, but because I haven't seen a way to do this. But basically, the problem here is that the .vue files are not findable via the resolve. And so it's a pretty simple fix. All you have to do is just add .vue to any of your import statements. And so I did that through all my files, and the little red squiggly line goes away. So then the next step was to get into that long list, which is the store.ts file. And store is basically just like any other store. It's pulling in a JSON object that has some complication to it. It's not that complicated, but it's enough to where we can definitely be applying TypeScript to it. And so my first step here was, well, like I have some really lame named things in here like item and JSON. And at the time, it probably made sense because I've done it in the past. But there's got to be a better way, at least to call these something slightly differently. So rename JSON to poses, because that's really what it is. And an individual item is a pose. So I've done that in the code here. Still have the red squiggly lines underneath stuff. And so I asked the question, what is a pose object? What is a poses array? What are these things? How can I describe these so that TypeScript can be properly compiling them? And so talking with Kris about this, he wrote this nice index.ts file that's in the model folder. And this has the proper description that TypeScript needs that I can then use. So we can already see that some of my questions are being formulated. I know that a pose is pose data. I know that poses is an array of a pose data, et cetera, et cetera. So the first step to implementing this is we import that .ts file and the objects therein. And so data in the store is basically just a generic global object that's been reconfigured so that we can do different things in Vue in our components. And so it was very simple to just type this as DB, which is coming in from that interfaces. And so in terms of this gigantic set poses function in particular, we just walk through it one by one and type them properly based on the interfaces that we've imported. And so Kris went over actually most of this. A lot of it should look familiar. So what about Vue files? So we all use single file components. You really don't want to be doing Vue without it. So the first step is you are going to add lang equals ts to your script block. And that immediately tells TypeScript, this is something I need to look at. And you can see right off the bat, as soon as that's all I've done, I get the red squiggly lines for all of my imports. So easy fix for that. We add .vue to them, and they go away. Further down in the file, we have a methods object that has a bunch of functions that I'm using, and you can see each one of them are obviously not being typed correctly. So we fix that. And so at this point, I've only edited one single file component. I've got my Webpack up and running. I've gotten my store working. All my JS files are working. I only had those 2 .js files, so that's really all I had to worry about. And the question is, did it work? No. This is my cat. There's some cat pictures in here. I'm sorry. Yoshi's terrible. Yeah, failed to compile. I don't know what this error really means. Do a quick Google search, and basically TS Loader, which I loaded the latest of, it was like 4.3 or 2 or something like that. 4.3, there it is not compatible with Webpack 3. So I just downgraded to the latest version of the 3.x series, ran npm install, and again, all the errors go away, everything looks good. Run npm run dev. No. So this time, we actually have a browser window, though, and we're actually seeing our app in the background, which is interesting. The other one was just blank. So we know the build process has actually gone a little further. But again, like this is an odd error. It's talking about my $ data keys, and not really sure what this is. So looking at the file, what ends up happening is that the $ data is something that TypeScript doesn't really know what that is. And in fact, if we go back to this guy, that's actually not even the way to write this. It could have been just this .selected tab. But even in that case, like it doesn't work. It doesn't know what everything inside this export default. TypeScript doesn't really understand what that is, so we need to tell it. And the way we do that is we wrap export default object literal with vue.extend. And we have to do this in every single file component. And since we're using Vue, we have to do import Vue from Vue. And so now this is basically telling, this is bringing in that global Vue shim from the very beginning, and TypeScript now understands that, oh, this is a Vue thing, I need to think that through. And now it works. So that's really all I had to do. At this point, you would walk through the remaining .vue files, do each one one at a time, and I had a completely working app in TypeScript. It really didn't take a lot of time at all. You can see bottom left corner, the problems is no problems. So what about Vue CLI 3? We've looked at everything based on CLI 2, but CLI 3 is absolutely the up-and-coming awesome thing. We're going to be hearing about it all this month and next month from Evan Yu. It's still currently in beta. But I wanted to see, like, I have this Vue 2 project. A lot of people are in this mode right now. CLI 3, I've been trying it out. It's not 100% yet. And so I know, though, I'm going to come here someday. And so I want to take this project and move it to CLI 3. One of the greatest features of CLI 3 is that things like TypeScript are built in to a menu system. I don't know if everyone's seen it or not, but it's really, really easy to set up. And once it's set up, you never have to look at Webpack config. It's just done. And every time they do an upgrade, all of the features are going to come in. And you're not really going to have to think about it at all. So step one, let's make a new project, Vue create, pose Ninja. And another cool feature of CLI 3 is it tells you right off the bat there's a later version. So let's fix that first. We grab the latest by just reinstalling it. I don't think there's an upgrade process yet, but I'd love to hear if there is. And so we rerun Vue create pose Ninja, and you can see just step by step, these are the settings that I used. And they basically match pretty much everything I was doing in my Vue 2 project. I'm using TypeScript with Sass, and we got polyfills, and there's prettier with ESLint is an option, and lint on save. So everything looks good. So CD into that, we run npm run dev or yarn serve, I think. Everything works fine. But I know that my previous 2x project had Axios, which we were using to pull from endpoints, so I install that. I have not done anything else. And so at this point, I still have a working project, so I start to copy my files over. And I'm not changing any of them. I'm just changing the references because I think they changed, like dist is now public, you know, but the index.html file is still there. So I just make sure that everything's looking at the right place. All the files are in the right place. I think I didn't even pull over the shim. I just left the shim that they have for Vue CLI 3. They have one there already. And right off the bat, it just worked. Like, no other edits required. So really exciting. The only thing I didn't do was fix my linting, because the linting in CLI 3 is different. But simple commands, and everything is fixed. So in terms of resources, they're on Vue JS Docs. They have an official page for it. They'll obviously be updating that as they go. And definitely check out the TypeScript Vue starter project on GitHub. This is the guy that actually helped get TypeScript into Vue. And there's a whole article by Evan Yu about it as well. So yeah, that's it. Let's move on to Brandon. Thank you all. So far, we've been at here, Politico, and Optoro.
We do a pitch for next.
Optoro. Next one's Optoro?
Yeah.
Yeah.
June. Brian?
For June? Oh, thank you. Brian, what are you going to talk about, Brian? I don't remember. What was it about? What's the generic?
Testing.
That's right. That's right. Vue testing, which we haven't really touched upon yet here. And Politico is just starting to do it. I know you guys have been doing it for a while.
Yes.
Yeah. So really looking forward to that. That's going to be, again, middle Wednesday of every month is basically what we're shooting for. We haven't done any show and tell stuff yet. This is the first time. Really looking forward to it. Muzafar, if you'd like to come on up. So something they did at VueConf was they had, like, in the middle of the day, they would do like these little short lightning talk things. And so I'm just looking forward to doing more of these. So please, 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 if you have stuff to show off, send it to us, and you can come up here and stand up here like Muzafar. Please, thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Muzafar. I'm a software engineer at Optoro. We hosted one of the VueDC meetups. We're also hiring mid to senior dev engineers. If you're interested, let me know. I'm from Tajikistan. I live in Virginia. I work with Vue, AngularJS, Angular 4+, and Node. Today I'm going to talk about Code Shop Timer. At work, we do this thing called Code Shop every week. All the developers get into a room for an hour. We code on something, do code randori, or try to solve a problem. Sometimes we also present stuff. And during Code Shop, sometimes we do randori where for every 3 minutes, someone will have a laptop and code on something and then pass the laptop to the next person.
Oh, nice.
And then the person next to you has to tell you, hey, and they have to guide you. and you as whoever is using a laptop, they can't do anything without getting feedback. So we were using like an iPhone to like do the timer stuff. I'm like, let me build something with Vue, and the goal was to learn Vue.js. I built this about like 5, 6, 7 months ago, and I wanted to try web workers, service workers, and push notifications. So this is a PWA timer app, works offline. I fixed the offline thing like 10 minutes ago. It used to work, and I updated to the latest VCLI, beta 10, and it broke it. And I fixed it 10 minutes ago. It's great. And this is the Lighthouse core for it. It also has push notifications. I don't have a backend for it. The backend I have is a Firebase Cloud Function, so it's serverless. So it uses Vue, Vue Router, Vuetify, TypeScript, Firebase, GitHub Pages for hosting, Service Worker, and Web Worker. So you might think, why would I need a Web Worker for a timer app? The thing is, I'm using a set interval with like a 100 or like 1 millisecond timeout. So every millisecond it calls a function. However, on the main thread, if you go off the screen or if your page goes to the background, Chrome limits the timers to be like every second. So if you rely on that, it's going to be extremely unreliable. So set timeout or set interval will be really weird. So if you use a web worker, it can run in the background. It's a completely different process, so it will be much safer. So on the left, I have the Vue app. This is like the main thread code, and then the web worker on the right side. And you communicate with messages. You post message. So my Vue code will say, hey, web worker, start the timer, and then the web worker will push updates every like millisecond pretty much. And then in the Vue side, I use a request animation frame to update the UI. And that's about it. So let me show the app.
Demo.
So let me hold on. There you go, much better. All right, so go to the timer side. You could set like 20 seconds, and then you go ahead and prepare the timer and make it a little bit smaller. And by default, you're not going to get notifications or sound, but if you ask for it,
maybe because you're in full screen mode, it might be showing up on
oh, is this also incognito?
Oh. Yeah, just do a new tab.
Okay. Oh, do new window. Oh, there you go. So once you accept a notification, I go ahead and request a notification token from Firebase. And with that notification token, I store that in the local storage. I know it's not the safest, but for a personal project, it's fine. And then once the timer ends, it goes ahead and makes a post request to Google Cloud Messaging Server. No, actually, it makes a post request to my Firebase Cloud Function. And the Cloud Function goes ahead and makes a request to GCM. So then the push notification comes through to this browser. So you don't really need like a backend server to do push notifications. So let's hope it works. So, let's go to the background.
Oh,
no, it's fine.
Okay. Oh, you want to see it?
Yeah. So it goes ahead and makes a request to the Firebase Cloud Function. I have it on the free plan because I only use this app. No one else uses it.
Do you have notifications on?
I have Growl, so I hope so.
It may not fire.
It's fine. You guys can demo it. I mean, I have the link on the slides. So, and then the code is over here. It's on my GitHub.
Not clicking through.
Nope. Do.
Yeah, it may not. I may have.
I think because it's on presenter mode, right?
Yeah, it could be. Plus, who knows what I did to block all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
Let me go to my GitHub page. Yeah, and I use the latest VCLI, and everything works pretty well. Some stuff were a little bit buggy, but other than that, like the PWA plugin works really fine. And then the way you configure some of the custom service worker stuff. Let me zoom in a little bit. you tell the workbox, by default, the PWA plugin uses workbox. And if you use the inject manifest mode, you can give it your own service worker file. And then in here, you just import whatever you need. That's my Firebase stuff. Don't use my credentials. Yeah, I have to change it now. or delete my Google account. Yeah. Okay. So then in here you register different routes. I think it's safe to keep that. So
it is.
Yeah.
To pass that. That's a public key.
Yeah. So I register different my host. That's the index HTML, and then all my like Google APIs. So this is like Firebase, and then my Google fonts and animate.css. And there's a few broadcast channels to talk between different processes. So web worker, service worker, and the main thread. This is, and when you get into push notifications, if you click on it, it will open a new window with a timer. Or if you already have one open, it will open that one. And that's about it. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
No
Great
problem.
job.
Maybe we'll get a computer up and running so you guys can see it actually working.